Okay, today we're going to take a quick look at how to make food chains and food webs. These are pretty easy. Food chain is just a diagram showing who eats who. So this isn't anything difficult. We saw a great example of that when we watched the video of the battle at Kruger. You might have seen in the environment there was a whole bunch of grass, and then there were some buffalo that were eating the grass, and then along came a lion that tried to eat the buffalo. So a food chain is just a diagram showing basically who eats who. The grass is getting eaten by the buffalo, and the buffalo is getting eaten by the lion. The only two rules to remember when you're drawing a food chain, and these are very, very important, is one, we're always going to start with a plant. Plants are going to be the base of our food chains. They're going to be where the energy starts. So we're always going to start with the plants. And then from there, it's very important that when you draw these arrows, the arrows point to whoever is doing the eating. So, for example, the buffalo is eating the grass, but we're going to draw the arrow as if the grass is going inside the buffalo or going into the buffalo, because this shows the movement of food and, more importantly, the movement of energy. So, the grass is going into the buffalo, or you can think of it this way: the energy that was in the grass is now going into the buffalo, and the energy that was in the buffalo is now going into the lion. So the direction of that arrow is very important. Now, a food chain's all well and good, but even just when we watch that video, the Battle of Kruger, we know that the real world is much more complicated than grass, buffalo, lion. So for that, we're going to be using a food web. And all a food web is several food chains overlapping one another. So for example, we could take our simple food chain of grass, buffalo, lion. Well, if I remember the video correctly, there was another animal trying to eat the buffalo, so we could add the crocodile to it, and the buffalo going into the crocodile. And you can see really this is just two food chains. Food chain 1 is grass, buffalo, lion, and food chain 2 is grass, buffalo, crocodile. And then we could keep going and add more organisms that are in the environment. Maybe there's some zebras that are eating some grass, and those zebras are getting eaten by the crocodiles. Maybe the zebras are also eating some trees. Maybe we could throw a giraffe in the mix. And you can see that these diagrams can get pretty complicated pretty quick. They're easy to read, but they're definitely challenging to make and diagram all the organisms in one ecosystem. So I'm going to show you a trick in 1 second of how to make these without getting confused by all these arrows. But before, there's two things to kind of note. These diagrams, these food webs, they let us do basically two things. They let us trace the path of matter and energy through an ecosystem. So the matter being the stuff that makes up all these organisms, and the energy being the things that's keeping them alive. It lets us diagram those going through the ecosystem. So you can see here, if we diagram this food web as a chart, it would look something like this. Here's all my organism and who's getting eaten by who and who's eating who. This is a very complicated chart compared to this diagram over here. However, when we make a food web, we're actually going to learn that it's much easier to start from a chart like this. So let me walk you through the process, because you're going to do this in just about a second here. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to look at who eats who, and we're going to draw arrows to everyone, and keeping in mind that the arrows should always point towards who is doing the eating. And there's a couple tricks to make this really easy and simple for you to do. So let's say we start off with a table of organisms, just something that looks a little like this. So let's say we're a scientist. The way we would kind of go through this process is we would go out into whatever ecosystem we're looking at. Let's just say it's a field near my house. And what we would do is we just list all the organisms that we see there. So just looking out my window, I see some grass, some grasshoppers, some hawks, some lizards, some mice, rabbits, and snakes. Maybe that's not actually what I see outside my house, but let's just pretend for a second this is what's living outside my house. And then what I do is I make two more columns here. An eats column is an is eaten by column. And they kind of tell you the same thing. They're just kind of reversed of one another. But we're going to make a column. So the grass, I'm watching the grass for hours. It doesn't seem to eat anything. So I'm going to write it doesn't eat anything. But I'm seeing the grass get eaten. So it's getting eaten by some grasshoppers, some mice, some rabbits. I do the same thing for all the other organisms in my table. So I might look at, say, the lizards. And the lizards are eating grasshoppers, and they're getting eaten by the hawks. So I'd go ahead and just fill out all that information in my table there. And then once I have that information down, I feel it's pretty accurate to the ecosystem, I can go ahead and start making my food web. So the way I'm going to do this is, and like I said, the first rule is we're always going to start off with our plants. So what we need to do is in our list of organisms, we need to identify all the plants. Now, one way you could do that is you could just look at the list of organisms and see if you recognize some names of plants. Obviously, we know grass is a plant. But let's say we're looking at a much larger list of organisms and maybe we didn't recognize all those organisms. Maybe there's something like blue carp on there or something, and we didn't know if that was a plant or not. The way that we should do it, and it's a lot easier and quicker, is we should look at this column here, eats. If we think about a plant, well, what does a plant eat? Well, plants don't eat anything. So if we look down this list here, we look for anything that eats nothing, we know that's a plant. So we know grass is a plant because it eats nothing. If I check my list here, there are no other plants. And again, the rules, we're going to start with our plants. We're going to start with all our plants. So this one's pretty simple. There's only one plant. But if there were two plants, I'd want to make sure that I write both of them down at the same time. Because there's only one plant, I'm just going to go ahead and put my one plant down on my food chain. So there we go. I'm going to draw a little picture of a grass, write grass. That's going to be my only plant. And then once we've identified all the plants, we don't need to use this eats column ever again. So we don't even need to look at the eats column because once we've figured out all our plants, we're just going to use the is eaten by column to make the rest of our food web. So from now on, I'm just going to be using this column right here, is eaten by. Make sure maybe if you're looking at a worksheet, they're not switched, but is eaten by is what I'm going to use. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start off with a plant that I already have written down. The only plant I have written down right now is my grass. If I had two plants, I would have to pick one to start with, but I only have one option here, my grass. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the is eaten by column and see what eats it. So the grass is eaten by a grasshopper, a mouse, and a rabbit. So basically I'm just going to work left to right here because it's easier for me, but it doesn't make a difference. But so I know my grass is eaten by a grasshopper. I don't currently have a grasshopper on my chart. I don't have anything on my chart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a grasshopper, and then I'm going to draw the arrow going into it. Because remember, the grasshopper is eating the grass. It's a little bit backwards here. If you look, it's the grass is eaten by a grasshopper, which means the grasshopper is eating the grass. So I'm going to draw the arrow going into the grasshopper, and then I'm going to move on my list. A mouse. I need a mouse. So I'm going to go ahead and add a mouse to my diagram. And then I'm going to draw the arrow going into the mouse because, again, the mouse is eating the grass. The grass is going into the mouse. And last, I need a rabbit. So I'm going to draw a rabbit on my food web here and draw the arrow going into it. So I have my grasshopper, my mouse, and my rabbit. My grasshopper, my mouse, and my rabbit. Now, this is very important. Every time you pick an organism on the list and you check their is eaten by column, I want you to do this. I want you to cross it off. It's gonna tell us that I'm all done with the grass. I've checked the grass. I've drawn all the arrows I need to for the grass, so I do not need to go back to the grass. Now, I got a lot of organisms on my food web that haven't been checked now. I've checked the grass, but I still need to check the grasshopper, the mouse, and the rabbit. So you can pick anyone to go with. In this case, I have not checked my grasshopper, so I'm just going to start with him. So my grasshopper, and again, I'm going to use the is eaten by column, lizard, and hawk. So let's just move left to right here. I currently don't have a lizard on my diagram, so I'm going to go ahead and draw a lizard, and then draw an arrow going into the lizard, because again, the grasshopper is going into the lizard. And then same thing for the hawk. I currently don't have a hawk, so I'm going to go ahead and draw a hawk. I'm going to draw an arrow from my grasshopper going into my hawk. And that takes care of the grasshopper. I've got the lizard and hawk. I can go ahead and cross him off the list. So I've checked my grass. I've checked my grasshopper. Now I've got 4 organisms I could check off from my list that haven't been crossed off anyway. The mouse, the rabbit, the lizard, and the hawk. I'm just going to keep going with these guys over here and finish them up. So I'm going to check my mouse. And my mouse is eaten by a hawk and a snake. Now, I already have a hawk on my diagram, so I'm not going to add another one. I'm just going to cheat and draw the arrow from the mouse to the hawk that I already have. So that takes care of the hawk, but I also need a snake, which I don't have on my diagram. So I'm going to go ahead and add a snake, draw the arrow going from the mouse to the snake, and that takes care of my mouse, hawk, and snake. I'm good. So I've checked the grass, the grasshopper, and the mouse. Let me just keep moving down. I can check the rabbit. So the rabbit is eaten by a hawk. Well, I already have a hawk, so I'm just going to draw an arrow going from the rabbit to the hawk, and that takes care of my rabbit. Let's see here. So I've done my grasshopper, I've done my mouse, I've done my rabbit. Let me move over here. I haven't checked the lizard off. He's not crossed off yet. So who eats the lizard? Oh, the hawk eats the lizard, so same thing. I can just draw an arrow going to the hawk. That takes care of my lizard. Moving down, I'm going to check my snake off. I haven't checked him, so he is also eaten by the hawk. I'm going to draw an arrow to the hawk. Then I got one organism on my table that I haven't checked, one organism in my food web that I haven't checked, which is the hawk. Who eats the hawk? Okay, nobody eats the hawk, so I don't need to draw any arrows there, and I'm good. So that takes care of my hawk. And then once every organism is crossed off, you've checked who eats each organism, you've drawn all those arrows, your food web should be complete. So you're going to practice this, and just remember those kind of, I guess, 3 rules now is that you always start with all your plants on your list. You check off every organism one at a time, crossing it off as you add more. Once every organism's crossed off, you're done. And don't forget the direction of those arrows matters. They need to point towards who is doing the eating. So good luck.